Shalom, everybody. This is Olivier, and I am excited today to do this show because we've done a couple of them, and apparently you guys like them. So I want to bring to you another episode of Three Jews, Five Opinions. So I welcome my friend David Tal and Robb Schwartz. David, shalom.
Well, shalom, and it's amazing to be here again. And yes, I've gotten amazing feedback about people who want to hear us talking balagan.
More Balagan. And Robb, thanks for joining.
Happy to be part of the Balagan.
So I will put the information for both of you in the description of the video, under the video, so they know how to reach you, how to connect with you if they want to go any further. But guys, as always, the days we live in, really, not a day goes by without giving us so much to discuss. And David, maybe we should start with you. We'll get your opinion. We just were like a week and a half after the release of the Bibas babies, and that was definitely a balagan. That's something that the whole world has been made aware of, and the evil of Hamas. It should really wake up the whole world. But you wanted to kind of catch us up on that because you had something you wanted to share on those babies. So what's on your mind?
So part of this dynamic that I really like is that we all have our Judaism in contact and connection, and we all share love of Jesus, but we come from different backgrounds. And what I find fascinating is how much things that impact one side of the Jewish nation impact all of us. The story that well, we all know what happened on the 7th of October and the hostages that were taken. And one of the symbols were the Bibas babies, two little redheaded babies and their mother Shiri and their father Yarden, who were kidnapped and taken into Gaza. And they became a symbol, a subject of the youngest hostages inside. And last week, like you said, the Hamas released the remains, the bodies of Shiri, Kfir, and Ariel. And again, the horror of the whole thing is one thing, but one of the things that we as Israel witnessed, and I think the world witnessed, is that the Hamas turned the release of the bodies, the turning over of the bodies, the handing over the caskets into a victory parade, into a triumphant event with music in the background and crowds cheering and holding up their cell phones to watch the coffins of tiny little babies march by.
They put on a whole show.
They put on a whole show to this. And again, I know my enemy is horrific. And I had a very interesting conversation with my wife about what evil is and how evil can take root in a place like Gaza in such a way. And there's a whole discussion in this. But they put on a show not only for their own people, they put on a show for the whole world. It was on CNN, it was on all the newscasters and news parts. And what I found deeply troubling is that the world was quiet about the show that was made of these bodies. The world was quiet that Jewish babies are being used to raise the hopes and raise the spirits, and the great peoples of the world. I heard a little bit from the German chancellor. I heard something from the British foreign press, but the whole world should have been outraged of not only of the murder, but the parade and the show, and nobody was outraged, and it chokes me up. And again, I'm Israeli. I kind of expected the world to treat Israeli babies, but you've studied this, Olivia. I mean, this is classical anti-Semitism.
Yeah, it's interesting. Not to toot my own horn, but in this book that I published a couple of years ago, the normalization of anti-Semitism, when the oldest hatred becomes a new normal, the first of 10 steps that leads to the normalization of anti-Semitism, when nobody's paying attention anymore, is apathy, or insensitivity, apathy, indifference. Uh, I think it was Elie Wiesel, if I recall, who said the opposite of hate is the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference.
Difference.
And wow, when you think about it. And so I'm looking at this release of the bodies of the Bibas, the members, the family members. And I uh, I wonder. I was talking to somebody yesterday about some of that, where a Christian, that person was telling me a story that they had a Christian friend who was very close to an Israeli, a Jewish person, and then the Christian, apparently the Christian friend never said a word since October 7th. They're very close to their Jewish friend, but they didn't say a word about October 7th. Not I'm sorry, not I'm praying for you, nothing. And that led that Jewish person to say, you know what? They're not friends with me anymore. They don't even care. And they kind of disconnected from them. And eventually, that Christian came to that Jewish person like almost a year and a half later saying, I figured out that this was a big deal. I don't know why it took him so long. I did not realize it was such a big deal. I'm sorry. I feel for you. How can I help? So that's the good ending of the story. But it made me think, and I want your opinion on that. Maybe Rob and can chime in. I think that the world has been so used to the Middle East crisis and terrorist this and attack here and a terrorist there, that they really did not fully grasp the gravity of October 7th. And I think this is also connected to what we could call Middle East terrorism fatigue. People don't look at the Middle East terrorism and drama taking place in Israel the way you guys do in Israel, because this is your daily life. Those who live in Israel, I think there's some fatigue there. That people go like, yeah, it's just another terrorist attack. Maybe it was a little worse, but it's just regular life in Israel, which really it was not. It changed the map. It changed history. Rob?
I don't even know where to start with this one, but Olivier, I agree with your comment about Elie Wiesel's observation that
Yeah.
indifference is the opposite of hate, or
Well,
love, I should say. And as I'm looking at the landscape, I'm hearing what David said. When you're tied into a story, and I really don't care what that story is. It could, hey, for all that matter, it could be the World Cup. It could be,
Super
you
Bowl.
know, the international singing competition, Eurovision. When you're watching all the articles and all the press focus, and that's your life for a week or 2 weeks or a month or whatever it might be, you wonder why the rest of the world is not as excited about it as you are. So what ends up happening is we get wrapped up into our own world, and we're seeing this day to day. We're living it. We're reading article after article. Maybe we're reading books about it. We're watching video about it. And then you find out, somewhat shockingly, as we're kind of sharing now, that the rest of the world is just not feeling it like we are. And it's personal to us, both as Jews and as also as believers, because we see the role of the chosen people in the scripture. God does not change his focus. The Jews are still chosen. That doesn't change because God is a God of covenants. And when he makes a covenant, he signs it, and it's not anything that he's going to break. He's going to hold his word. The rest of the world doesn't say it that way. And what's disturbing to me is the story you just shared a minute ago about those two friends, one Jewish and one a Christian, that the Christian awareness, they might be familiar with anti-Semitism, but it's not something that they've ever lived with. We've lived with this. The story of the Holocaust and World War II is probably the most recent example, but if you know Jewish history, this goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. The Crusaders, the times where the Jews were accused of using the matzah as blood libels and all of that. And so we have a full history of understanding what it means to be a persecuted people. But underneath all of that, when you dig into it a little deeper, you find out this is part of Satan's plan to wipe the Jews out and to make God a liar, because guess what? If the Jews are destroyed, the Messiah has no people to return to. And that's the underlying thing. And when the Christians lose sight of that because it gets so wrapped up into, building their churches, and this is not an accusation as much as it is just daily reality. They have, and this is across the board, the vast majority of Christianity has no interest in Judaism or Jewish people. So what do you do with that? And
Well,
that's
by
one
the
of the
way,
things that I live with every day.
even evangelical Bible reading Christianity is not putting Israel on the forefront right now. And I'm appalled and amazed, and I think we all share this, how even the people who read the Bible and teach the Bible and preach the Bible and talk the Bible are not connecting to the Bible's main characters
Right?
in world events today.
Yep.
And that's appalling.
I before we move forward, Rob, you said something at the beginning. You said, when we're all, engaged into something that we're watching, the Super Bowl, the World Cup, a big event, we wonder, why the rest of the world is not as engaged as we are. And so it's almost like there's an excuse for, like, well, we're so focused on whatever we're focused on in our own world. We all have, the area where we specialize in, spending a lot of time in. And then we should maybe give. It sounded like you wanted to give the rest of the world a little bit of grace. There's a difference between being involved, in my opinion, there's a difference between being involved in watching the Super Bowl or watching the whole season of baseball or a whole series on Netflix, and this is becoming your life, and denouncing anti-Semitism. There's got to be a difference. One of them is just, for fun or for a hobby. The other one involves, the life of the Jewish people. And I agree with and so I don't disagree with you, Rob, but I think we have to separate the two different categories, because they don't they're not connecting. It's not apples to apples. But David, I agree with you that it is very disturbing how silent. I mean, I agree with both of you. I think we all agree. So it's very disturbing how silent the church has remained, and it is an indication of the times we live in, I think, and it also is it should be a, maybe not an encouragement, but an incentive for Christians who care about Israel to make a difference. And like our good friend Pastor Brandon Holthouse has said to me many times when I thank him for everything he does for Israel. He goes, Olivier, if you really care, if you really mean it, you've got to have some skin in the game. And so that right now, I don't think that Bible reading, and I don't like saying it, David, because I've been in ministry for 30 years. I've been a believer for 42 years almost, but I don't like to say it. But the vast majority of evangelical Christianity, they have no skin in the game.
Well, that's the thing. That might be true politically and culturally. That is definitely not true spiritually. And anybody who is a Christian has Jewish skin in the game, if you want to say it like that. But
What do you
I,
mean? What do you mean by that?
I mean, if you are a born again Christian, you have a connection to the Jewish story by definition. You have a connection to the Jewish people by definition. The Old Testament and the New Testament make that very clear in numerous places, which means if you are a Christian, what happens to the Jews is relevant to your spiritual world.
Easy
And that
for you
is,
to say.
yeah, well, but that is the skin in the game, which brings me to something that I've heard Rob say many times, and that is that maybe the role of the Messianic Jews, the Messianic Christians, the Hebrew Christians, the believers, call it what you want, is to make the bridge or be the bridge or connect the bridge between the Jewish backdrop for everything that we're talking about and the importance of this to what's going on from a spiritual point of view in the world today to the Christian world. And again, that I think is what we as messianics are doing. We're coming and we're saying, yes, we're Christian. We believe in Jesus. We have, and we read, the Paul's letters, but we're also Jewish. And that is closely intertwined. It should be intertwined for you as a believing Christian, but it is symbolized and actually realized in who and what we are. And Ben David, for instance, is a classical example of that.
Yes, it is. Jewish believers can definitely be a bridge. I just want our listeners to remember, to understand that a bridge is it's a very good concept. A bridge is a good way to connect, but a bridge is not a one-way bridge. A bridge is a place where people cross from both ends and meet in the middle, maybe. But Christians can go one way, Messianic Jews can go the other way. So it is not a one-way bridge. Nobody is asking anybody to, I don't think Messianic. This is something it's interesting how the conversation is changing. But that's again, 3 Jews, 5 opinions. I love it. Very often, I'll talk to, I have a good friend of mine in California, in Long Beach, pastor for many years. And when I used to go to the congregation that Robb and I used to attend, he would come. That's how we became friends. He would come to all the traditional Jewish festivals, and he would love to learn about those things. And we became very close that way. And then one day, he invited the leader of the congregation to come to their Christmas cantata. And he said, hey, you know what? We'd love to share some of our traditions with you. And the leader of the Messianic congregation said, not to him in his face, but he smiled and he walked away and told me later I wouldn't be caught dead going there. And I think that's wrong. If we're going to invite uneducated Christians, uneducated on the Feast of Israel and the tradition, to come to a Messianic congregation, we have to be willing. We might not participate on a regular basis, but we have to be willing to go both ways. That's the bridge, 2 ways, and say, hey, I'll go to your Christmas celebration. I mean, do I do Christmas? That's for another conversation. Yes, maybe not, but it's got to be a 2-way street. Robb, do you have an opinion on that?
I have 12 opinions on that. For years, my daughter, who went to Lutheran school, grades 5 through 8.
Oi!
I know, right? This was a loving group of people, and she sang at Christmas Eve for like probably 10 years. And we always went to this candlelight service in the late evening or the early evening, late afternoon, and it was lovely. I'm not a Christmas guy particularly, but recognizing that we are the body of Messiah, and the body of Messiah has different flavors and different looks. And I don't criticize anybody that has a Christmas tree, as long as that
Thank
person
you.
recognizes.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Nobody present in this room.
No, we were not going to name anybody by name, but thank you.
No, but the point of all that
my
is,
wife thanks you.
yeah, right. I think the point of all that, it's not about the pageantry. It's not about any of that. It's about the one we worship, and we have to maintain that focus. Joel Richardson, the writer, I'm part of the way through his book, When a Jew Rules the World. And I can't wait to finish the book, because it seems to me that if there's any anti-Semitic leanings within the church, and it doesn't really, and I'm not pointing at any particular part of it, it could be on the more Orthodox side or the less Orthodox, wherever it is, they better realize quickly that the one they worship is Jewish.
Yeah.
And this Jewish Messiah is not coming back to New York, Brooklyn. He's not coming back to Rome. He's not coming back to Athens, Greece. He's not coming back anywhere on the planet. Paris?
Maybe.
And
He's coming back to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And it's only going to be when the Jewish people according to Matthew 23:39, is it? When the Jewish people say Baruch haba b'Shem Adonai, when the Jewish people call for the Messiah. Only then, when the nation, as Zechariah 12 tells us, when the nation recognizes the one they have pierced, and they mourn for him as one mourns for his only son. And so I keep thinking of the broad Christian message for those of us that recognize as Messianic Jewish believers. We recognize that we live in two worlds, in a sense. I don't know if Jesus came back today, how he would feel about walking into, name the church. But I know if he walked into a Messianic congregation where the Torah was being read, or the prophets were being talked about, or the teaching was Jewish or Hebraic or whatever it is, that he wouldn't feel comfortable there at home, as he was in the Gospel of Luke when he picked up the scroll from Isaiah and read from it. So I just keep thinking to myself, my greatest joy my greatest joy is when I see someone of non-Jewish birth who embraces a Hebraic messianic perspective, not changing that individual's, they're still a Gentile, and that's fine. That's how God made them, and that needs to be celebrated.
Yeah.
But Paul's point in all of his letters and in the book of Acts, and you can see where he traveled, he celebrated the Gentiles who embraced this faith. He tells the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 5, when you celebrate the feast, celebrate it without leaven. There was an expectation on his part the Gentiles would recognize the Jewish covenants and follow them accordingly. So that's where I sit. I'm right in the middle of the bridge. I love to have, to be part of both worlds as best as I can.
Yeah, and
I'm
that's
gonna make
as messianic leaders, that is where we need to be, in the middle of the bridge, telling one side, this is what you can benefit from the other side. I mean, telling both sides what they can benefit from each side, and that's something that if we do it well, we'll be able to effectively, bridge the gap between Gentile Christians and Messianic Jews. And I think we the three of us and others in our situation, I think we have a mandate, we have an obligation to really do whatever we can to educate the Gentile branch of the body of Messiah on the Jewish things, without going overboard, without telling them that they have to wear a yarmulke and keep kosher and keep the Sabbath. We're not under the law anymore, but letting them know, the Jewish heritage, the Jewish perspective, which, like you said, David, is part of Christianity, because Christianity, it was Benjamin Disraeli, a prime minister of the late 1800s, I think, British prime minister, who said, and he said it the most succinctly, nobody can make it any shorter, Christianity is biblical Judaism fulfilled.
Ooh, that's profound. And I think I want to make a balagan out of this, though, because I want to add on another layer. We all know this. We've all dealt with this. We've all talked about this. We've all learned this. But there's a new, I'm going to say, flavor of anti-Semitism that I'm looking at much, much more. And that is for lack of a better word, the political or the woke kind of anti-Semitism, which basically, and it connects to the church story that we're talking about. It's basically turning against the Jews because of the political situation with Israel, and because wokeness and left-leaning tribal politics puts us on one side and the Jews on the other side. And when that seeps into the church, then it's not good form to be connected to the Jews, because the Jews are committing genocide in Gaza. And I've actually heard that being said, which brings on, for lack of a better word, replacement theology. So a woke version of Christianity has to replace the Jews, because the Jews, besides all the rest of the reasons, now there's a political problem, there's a racial problem, there's a tribal problem against the Jews as a result of what's happening in Israel and in Gaza as a result of that. And again, we're seeing an overlap of the politics and the legalistic aspect moving into the realm of anti-Semitism.
That is one of the biggest balagans we face.
Yeah.
I think I told David this a while back, Israel's fighting four wars right now.
Mhm.
It's fighting a war on the ground. It's fighting a war in the spirit. There's a spiritual element to all this. How do
Definitely.
you look at what Hamas is doing with the Bibas babies is a good example. And there's, if people don't recognize this as spiritual warfare, I don't know what else you can. And the depth of depravity that October 7th brought is beyond any human comprehension. The third war is the war for the mind that's been fought for the media, and everywhere you look in the media, there's a war. I mean, whether it's online, whether it's in the mainstream media, whatever. The fourth war is the economic war. If they could break Israel's back financially, they'll do that too. So I keep thinking to myself, what we're looking at here is a multifaceted attack, not only on Israel, but every Jew on the planet. And it's astounding to me that any Jew on the planet, especially the United States, will vote Democrat. I used to be a Democrat. Most of my friends were Democrats. My family are Democrats. But when you begin to see the separation
Well,
now,
that's when Democrats still had a brain.
right, right. But when you see the separation now, especially I mentioned this morning to you guys the Doge hearings today, and what they're starting to rip off in terms of the expenditures that were going through U.S. aid, and the role that Samantha Power played up until the time she left the office just a few weeks ago. They were clearly anti-Semitic separation, keeping Israel's hands tied behind its back, while at the same time funding Hamas. There's been accusations of this for years, but now as these guys dig into the funding, they've got they're bringing the receipts now to the table. And the Biden administration, and going back to Obama, and even, I remember even the George Bush administration were trying to force the Israelis out and back from what they were doing. And I'm thinking to myself, I hope people are aware, especially the Jewish people in this country and around the world, that governments are not necessarily your friends. And that's a really harsh reality to come to grips with.
Well,
So,
Jews have been living like that down through the millennia. Jews have
Well,
always
yeah.
had a mistrust of
Yep.
governments. And I think maybe that's a whole different dynamic of, why do Jews actually vote liberal? But we can get into that.
so guys, I'm listening here, and I think we are where we are today. You're looking at Doge discovering all this funding of terrorism basically under our nose, and now we're finding out how much not Doge, but the different agencies that they are basically
Yep.
exposing right now, and I don't think we've seen the worst. Uh, but going back to the 60s, 1964, the Soviet put Yasser Arafat on the scene. He started the narrative
PLO.
of the
PLO.
displaced Palestinians.
Yes.
So 1964, you go another 40 years of saying the same lie over and over again. People are no longer questioning, they're buying it. Then in 2005, 40 years later, you've got the beginning of the BDS movement, started with, by Mahmoud Abbas and Omar Barghouti in 2005. And then you pushed another 20 years, that's now. And you've got the complete demonization of anything Jewish. And I recently heard a seminar by Dr. Patterson at, I believe he's a Holocaust professor at a University of Dallas, Texas, and he was doing a seminar on the topic of anti-Semitism, and he said something that was profound, and maybe I wanted you guys to comment on that. He said, and I want to make sure I quote him right. He said there's a big difference between saying that Jewish people are evil and evil is Jewish. And I thought,
So
wow.
I'm going to do something very Jewish because I like the way you laid out how the anti-Semitism in the modern period kind of grew and became something that was politically, and it has even a political aspect today. But again, I'm going to do something very Jewish, and I'm going to say, well, I'm not surprised. What was the Inquisition? What was the Spanish Empire turning on its Jews and creating an organization that's whole job was to root out, find, persecute, and connect to the Jews. I mean, this is where we are. Nazism used the hatred of the Jews to bring their empire together. The Spaniards used hatred of the Jews to bring them. I mean, we are, and again, this is spiritual as much as anything else. We are the symbol of what God does in the world, and the fight against God in the world takes on the fight against the Jews. I mean, there's a correlation between the two, which and again, I'm hearing this discussion. I'm saying, wait a minute. We've been here this before. The Jews become the indicator of what side of right you're on.
Canary in the coal mine, David.
Yeah, yeah. That's it. I mean, and the whole world right now seems to be leaning towards the side that's against the Jews. Again, to quote that guy, Dr. Patterson, if everything that is evil is Jewish, it's very different than saying Jews are evil, because when you say Jews are evil, you say Jews are evil, but Nazis are evil as well, and a child molester are evil, and then you can make a list. But when you say evil is Jewish, all of a sudden you're saying anything that is bad that happens in the entire world at any given moment in history, moving backwards, moving forward, is Jewish. And so
Which
now all of a sudden you're saying that we got to stop evil, because anybody in the world would say, well, we have to do whatever we can to stop evil. And if evil is Jewish, then you have no choice. You have to stop the Jews if you want to stop evil.
which brings me, and maybe to tie together where we started off, okay? If basic human instinct is to be appalled about the death of children, then watching a ceremony celebrating little baby coffins and not reacting it has to be connected to this indifference that you were talking about the Jews. And that's indicative of how far we've moved away, where we've moved away from the basic human instincts that we have, because they're playing out against the Jews. And again, the Inquisition, the pogroms, and the Holocaust mean that the world at some point overcomes its human tendencies in order to persecute the Jews, because they're persecuting more than just the Jews. They're persecuting something very deep and very evil. And we're seeing that in Gaza right now.
Rob,
Well,
Rob, when David says something profound, we have no opinion to add.
no, sorry.
No. Uh, I can't comprehend October 7th. I don't know that any of us can comprehend it. It's being celebrated in Gaza and I'm just going to be honest about it, certain Islamic circles. I'm not going to call all of it.
Not to
the entire
mention,
Islam.
don't forget the U.S. campuses.
Well,
Oh,
the
yeah.
U.S. campus, that's where I was going with this, is that it's spreading in places where you would hope you would never see it. And what they're going to find out, and I think they've already figured it out, there's a lot of funding coming out of Qatar, for example, that has been funding these Arabic, well, I should say maybe Middle East study programs or whatever at the major universities, but they're just covers. They're covers, and these professors that are part of the SJP organization, Students for Justice in Palestine, which, by the way, was just was shut down apparently at UCLA recently, and I hope it goes across the country. Beginning to find out that anti-Semitism has become ingrained and deeply rooted within the university systems, and that's a problem because that changes thinking of these kids for maybe for the rest of their lives. And what's terrifying to me, the kids don't really read, nor do they know the history of anti-Semitism or even any Jewish history at all. And that's a concern when they're basically brainwashed in the classroom. If
Well,
I
yeah,
would
but
love,
they don't know. The vast majority don't know what they're talking about, but they still facilitate the work of the
Agreed.
enemy.
I
And it's so you could almost look at I'm thinking about this as I'm listening to you. The U.S. campus community is like acting like the Vichy government of France by complying with the enemy and saying whatever you need to do, we'll help you. We don't understand fully your agenda, but we'll help you facilitate whatever you need. So that's what the Vichy and Marshal Pétain did with Hitler. He said, we'll run France the best we can according to your agenda. We'll give you the Jews. Well, that's what the U.S. campuses are doing right now. They're exposing the Jews. Opening them to harm. You were mentioning something, David, about I think earlier offline, but I'd like you to say a few words on that. Exposing the identity of some Jewish people. What was that all about?
Well, it turns out that as the West crumbles, and again, the West was built on Christian ideology or Christian, I'm going to say, theology. The first one that's crumbling faster is Canada. And I came across an article in Canada on a website called The Maple, which is very anti-Semitic. But one of the things that they did is they went down, a reporter, a journalist, or whatever you want to call him, went and actually did a data research, web research about Canadians who served in the Israeli army and the Israeli IDF, and basically made a list of 85 names of Canadian dual nationals who were in the IDF. Somebody similar to me. I'm an American and Israeli, and I did serve in the IDF, and actually published their names just so everybody in their environment knows that they are actually working with or studying with or are friends with a genocidal baby killer. And they're doing that publicly on the web. Now, the new warfare right now is this social media warfare where, I mean, anybody who wants to can do something like that. And what I'm seeing is a passage or an evolution from anti-Semitism that was focused around the religion, okay, to anti-Semitism that is focused around the political and the nationality of Israel. And it's becoming an anti-Israel, I mean, you hear this argument, oh, I'm anti-Zionism, I'm not anti-Semitic, okay? And no, you can't really connect it. And now people who are defending the Jewish nation are becoming targets for this new kind of anti-Semitism, and it's being played out on the social media landscape. And I
Yeah.
think that's why what we're doing here is so important.
Yeah, and that's another one of my 10 steps in the book, demonization of the defenders. The defenders of Israel being demonized. By the way, do you know who said? I'm going to test. Okay, our history
Uh-oh.
buff is Robb here, so I'm going to test his knowledge. Do you know, Robb, who said anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism?
Oh boy. You know
Do,
what, Olivier?
do,
You got me
do,
stumped
do.
here. You
What?
got me stumped. You got me stumped.
Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther King. Okay, yeah.
Oh,
Well, it's interesting. There's a book written years ago by Claire Sterling called The Terror Network, and one of the things that she put in there, it's one of the basic. There's two major tenets of terrorism. The first one is to terrorize the population and just frighten the daylights out of them. The second thing is to change the dynamic or the narrative so that the victim becomes the perpetrator and the perpetrator becomes the victim. And what you do, the way you do that is you provoke the response. So, for example, Hamas comes over the border and kidnaps babies. Israel responds by dropping bombs and shooting missiles and sending in thousands of troops. And the world says it's disproportionate. So therefore, the victim has now been switched with the perpetrator. And that's exactly what's happened in Israel, and it's happened from the beginning. Israel is the victim, and yet every time it responds, it's blamed. And that's a
What would
basic
have
tenet of
happened?
terror.
Okay, so what would have happened if Israel would have gone back into Gaza and kill, maim, burn, and rape 1,200 Gazans and stop right there? Would they say, okay, good, now it's proportionate?
Great question. Olivia, it's a question of the ages.
That just
Oh,
makes no.
no, no.
It's
It makes no
ridiculous.
sense. And anybody who stops and thinks about it makes no sense. Again, I come from a military background, and the idea of proportionality is totally against any kind of military doctrine.
Yep.
Because if I'm fighting a war against the enemy, the last thing I want is for as many soldiers as I kill to be killed on my side. I mean, I do want disproportionality. I want to kill more of the enemy than the enemy kills of me. Isn't that the basic aspect of warfare? And anybody who stops and think about it for a minute, it does make sense.
David, your point is so right on the money. I don't have any military background. And Olivier does. Believe it or not, Olivier actually served in the French Navy
Alors, oui.
after World War II. So we can't blame. Well, anyway, that's a whole other story. David, your point is correct. The purpose of war is to win,
Yes.
and it you got to throw all of these
Unless you're
arguments out.
Israel, then the purpose to war has to be completely different because nobody wants Israel to win, no matter
That's
what.
that's
Which
been the argument. Yeah,
Which brings me to what you said before. When you switch the victim and the perpetrator, you take away the ability or the capability or the opportunity to win. And what is we've seen in the Gaza war is the world, for anti-Semitic reasons, taking away Israel's ability and possibility to win. And we're even seeing that today.
Yeah.
So, I want to stress a couple of things since we are talking about this. This is going to be a very interesting week because the first stage of this, I'm going to call it ransom of our loved ones, that's been taking place. People call it the hostage agreement. It's over. And the question is, what is going to be the situation that is going to come out of this? And there's a very, very complex negotiation going on all over the world. I'm going to drop something that I heard about yesterday, and I think is kind of amazing. Both Syria and Lebanon are thinking of joining the Abrahamic Accords, which means that the negotiation is spreading wider in the Middle East than we thought it could have. And that's going to be a very interesting indicator to look at during this week. And one last thing that's going to be very interesting, are we going to hit Iran's nuclear facilities or not? All of that. Let's say, tune in next week.
I was gonna say for Iran and for Syria and Lebanon, maybe we'll have to do another show because we're going on. We're nearing the end of this episode, and but again, we never. If you look at the Middle East crisis in Israel and end times prophecy, we never lack subject matter. Every day something new, and of course, with this new administration in the U.S., things are moving very, very fast. So I think we need to wrap this up. I just want to wrap it up, and I'll give you both a chance to say a final word. But I just want to wrap this up by saying to our audience here that just remember what David said at the beginning of our podcast. He said that we bring three different perspectives from David, an Israeli Jew, Robb, an American Jew, and Olivier, a European Jew, son of Holocaust survivors. So we bring different perspectives, but we are all three of us Jewish by birth. But beyond that, the one thing that ties us together more than anything is our belief in Yeshua the Messiah, Jesus. And all that we talk about here is interesting conversation. It's making us think. It should make us react. It should make us do something to make a difference as believers. But at the end of the day, if you're watching and you do not have a personal relationship with Yeshua the Messiah, then today is your day. All you have to do is believe that he died and rose again, that he is God in the flesh. He died and rose again. He died for my sin, our sin, your sin. It's a simple belief, and that puts you into the family of God, and your sins are forgiven. And regardless of whatever land is given, taken in the Middle East, whatever agreement is signed or not signed, wars is started or finished, regardless of all that, and it's all can be discussed, and it's very interesting. Your eternal destiny is what matters at the end of the day. David, final words.
Well, we just now received a couple thousand J dams, which are probably 1 ton bombs from the United States, were offloaded in Ashdod. We're putting together an iron beam system that will blow missiles and drones out of the air with lasers. We all know about the Iron Dome system, and I can talk to you from here to the rest. I mean, for a long time about what Israel needs from a military point of view. But like we said, this is a spiritual war. And I'm going to say this more than anything. My people need Jesus more than we need JDAMs.
Amen.
And that is something that you can do something about, because when you reach out to somebody Jewish right now in this situation that we've just now expressed, and you understand what we're feeling, and you say, I do love you because I am a follower of Jesus, that in itself is a door opener. And this is the time to use that kind of dynamic.
Amen. Robb?
My heart goes out to all of the victims and the families. There isn't anybody in Israel that has not been touched by this personally, and the level of stress I understand is beyond anything that we can understand. But to the Christians that are watching, the Gentile Christians in particular, you are our heart and soul. Without you praying for the Jewish nation and the Jewish people, and sharing the gospel in a loving way, and reading and learning Jewish history, you're the key. Paul was all over this in the letters that he wrote in the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah. And to me, the Jews can't get this done without the Christians, Gentiles, and the Christians can't get this done without the Jews. Romans chapters 9, 10, and 11, and particularly Romans 11, gives you the game plan, the Christian mission, if you want to call it that, which is to provoke the Jews to jealousy. Love them into the kingdom, embrace them, pray for them, help them, do whatever. And like David said, we need Yeshua more than we need JDAMs and MOABs and everything else. So keep up your prayers, keep the faith, hold the faith, and look up, for your redemption draws near.
Amen. Well, guys, we did it again. And, I don't think we're good Jews because as I'm listening to the three of us in this episode, I think we agreed on just about everything. So, three Jews, three opinions. We cannot just have three opinions, we have to have more than that. But I love you guys. I think this conversation needs to keep going because people need to hear what's on our heart. People need to hear what we get from the Bible. And people need to see how we can connect current events to biblical prophecy. And so until next time, to both of you and to those watching, be blessed.
Shalom and litraot.
Shalom.